B1, B2, English story. A new home. John and Pippa have just bought their first house together. They've saved up for years to be able to afford a modest house in a decent part of town. They've scrimped and saved these last few years. They've been desperate to move out of their rented accommodation and into their own home. They always dreamt of having a beautiful garden with a pet dog running around it. Finally, out of the blue, a house came up for sale in their favourite part of town. They couldn't believe their luck. The only problem was that they knew lots of other people would want the house too. Pippa called the estate agent to make an enquiry, and they both crossed their fingers that they could get a viewing as soon as possible. They knew how competitive the area was, and they didn't want to miss their chance. They had to be quick. John sat nervously as he heard Pippa talking on the phone. Of all the houses they had looked at, this one had everything they wanted. A nice back garden, 2 bedrooms, and it had been fully renovated. This really appealed to them both. They didn't want to buy a house that would need loads of work doing to it. They wanted to be able to move in and enjoy it without worrying about finding builders and plumbers to fix things. Finally, Pippa hung up the phone. She told John that the house had already had an offer. It had only been up for sale for 2 days. However, luckily for them, the offer was low, and so the owners of the house had rejected it. They were in with a chance. Pippa had arranged a viewing for the next day. That night, they decided to drive over to the house and check out the street. It was perfect. Beautiful blossom trees lined the street, and there was plenty of space for parking. They went for a walk around the block, and everyone they saw nodded or said hello. It was so nice to be surrounded by friendly people. They could both really imagine living there. They just had to hope that the house looked as lovely on the inside as it did on the outside. That night, Pippa and John couldn't sleep. They were full of anticipation for what the next day was going to bring. The next morning, they were both nervous and excited. They got ready for the viewing and drove back over to the house. It looked even more perfect in the daylight. They rang the doorbell and waited for the current owners to answer. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, they answered the door. Pippa and John took off their shoes and were given a grand tour of the house. It was stunning. The current owners had done such a brilliant job of renovating it. Everything was new and was styled exactly how Pippa and John would want it. The back garden was lovely. It had a shed and a patio area where they could have barbecues with their friends and family. The front of the house also had a little patch of grass and a small hedge. John had visions of adding a little wooden gate and changing the front door. Pippa wanted to renovate the attic to create another bedroom. They could do so much with this house. They spoke to the people who lived in the house about how much they wanted. Then Pippa and John went home and worked out how much they would be willing to pay. That night, they sat down at their kitchen table and did some serious calculations. They worked out how much they could stretch their money and how much they would need to put aside for furniture. They didn't want to overstretch themselves. They wanted to be sensible. Of course, they really wanted the house, but they didn't want to be left without any money to do anything else. The next morning, Pippa made the call to the estate agent. She gave them their offer. They could afford to pay a little more, but they didn't want to start too high. The estate agent said they would get back to Pippa as soon as possible with an answer. Now Pippa and John had to play the waiting game. It was going to be a long day. They both believed in the power of positive thinking, so they decided to go to a local furniture shop and pick out the pieces they would like in their potential new home. After the furniture shop, they went to a local garden centre and picked out which plants, herbs, and vegetables they wanted to plant in the garden. The garden centre had a lovely cafe, so after all the window shopping, they decided to get a nice cup of tea and some cake. Pippa opted for an orange sponge, and John got some flapjack. Pippa got out her notepad, and together they worked out how much their monthly bills for the house would be. If they didn't get it now, they would be devastated. They had everything planned out and ready to go. They were both so ready to move out of their rented accommodation. They just wanted something of their own, somewhere they could put their own personal stamp on. After they'd finished their cake and tea, Pippa went to the toilet. While she was gone, John heard her phone ringing in her bag. It was quite loud and distracting, so he decided to take out her phone and answer it. "Hello, Pippa's phone?" he answered. It was the estate agent. All of a sudden, John felt very nervous. He looked around the cafe nervously for Pippa, but she was nowhere to be seen. The estate agent started talking to him very fast. He could hardly keep up with everything they were saying. The call ended, and he hung up in a complete haze. John was in shock as Pippa appeared at their table. "Sorry, there was a queue for the ladies," Pippa said as she sat back down. "Shall we head off home then?" John took a deep breath and told Pippa about the call. "Pippa," he said, "we got it. We got the house." Pippa squealed. They were both so excited. They couldn't contain their excitement. They rushed outside and gave each other a big hug. On the walk back to their car, Pippa called the estate agent to get the full details. In the excitement, John couldn't remember anything specific. On their way home from the garden centre, they decided to drive past their new home. They couldn't believe it. In a matter of months, this cute little detached house would be theirs. "Now," said John, "we can go to the animal shelter and get the dog we've always wanted." We hope you enjoyed this lovely English story. Thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to like and subscribe.